best friend invites me and my husband to her baby shower, only to publicly announce that yesterday, my husband, a 32-year-old male, and I, a 30-year-old female, attended my best friend Sarah's baby shower. Sarah, also 30, and I have been inseparable since our college days. Back then, we started as random roommates assigned by the university housing system, but what began as convenience quickly transformed into one of the most meaningful relationships in my life. We bonded over late-night study sessions, shared ramen dinners, and, most importantly, our mutual obsession with live music. If there was a concert in town, you could bet we were in the front row. Over the years, our friendship deepened. Summers were spent at each other's family homes, where her mom made the best apple pie and my dad would tell the same cheesy jokes every year. By the time we graduated, we were practically sisters. Life, of course, had its own plans for us. While I pursued my dream of working at a prestigious law firm, Sarah decided to break away from the traditional 9-to-5. She dived into the world of social media, exploring content creation and finding her niche. Despite our contrasting paths and often chaotic schedules, we held tight to our weekend rituals. Whether it was hiking, trying out the latest trendy restaurant, or binge-watching our favorite rom-coms, we made sure to prioritize our time together. It was during one of these cherished girls' nights out that I met Michael. He was there celebrating his friend's bachelor party, and the moment our eyes met across the bar, something clicked. It sounds cliche, but I just knew he was different. We still joke about who fell in love first, though the truth is, it happened simultaneously. Fast forward a few years, and we've been happily married for 5 years now. Our relationship is everything I could have hoped for, and more. Every now and then, I thank Sarah for dragging me to the pub that night because without her, I would never have met Michael. Sarah, on the other hand, took her time finding love. She was single for a few years after my wedding, focusing on herself and her newfound career. But eventually, she met Mark, a sweet and reliable man who balanced her adventurous spirit perfectly. They tied the knot 2 years ago, and seeing her so happy with him brought me immense joy. So when Sarah told me 3 months ago that she was pregnant, I was beyond ecstatic. She glowed with excitement as she shared the news, and I couldn't wait to see her embark on this beautiful new chapter. When she asked me to be the baby's godmother, I was genuinely honored. Planning the baby shower became a labor of love. Sarah and I debated themes for weeks before finally settling on yellow, her favorite color, a perfect choice for the joyful occasion. I handled every detail, from coordinating with the caterer, who I had worked with before at my brother's wedding, to ensuring the cake design matched Sarah's Pinterest inspiration board. On the day of the event, I arrived early with Michael to help set up. Mark greeted us at the door, mentioning that Sarah was still upstairs getting ready. As I adjusted the cake's position for the umpteenth time to make sure it was perfectly centered on the table, guests began to trickle in. The baby shower was everything I hoped it would be. Laughter and chatter filled the air as old college friends reunited, swapping stories and updates about our lives. When Sarah finally descended the staircase in her vibrant yellow dress, she looked radiant. Her smile lit up the room, and everyone was eager to shower her with congratulations. As we all settled down for lunch, Sarah stood up to say a few words. She began by thanking everyone for coming and expressed her gratitude for their love and support. But then, her tone shifted. She took a deep breath and glanced around the room as though bracing herself for what she was about to say. "I have someone very special to thank for making this day possible," she said, her voice steady but carrying an edge of nervous excitement. At first, I assumed she was about to share a sweet anecdote about Mark, but when I noticed him frowning slightly, clearly confused, my stomach twisted. Sarah pointed directly at Michael. "Everyone, I'd like to introduce the father of my baby," she announced, her voice suddenly louder and sharper. Time seemed to freeze. I could feel every pair of eyes in the room snapping to Michael and me. For a moment, I thought I might have misheard her. The room was suffocatingly silent, the kind of silence that feels like a vacuum. Michael looked as stunned as I felt, his expression a mix of shock and disbelief. My heart pounded in my chest as my mind scrambled to process her words. Was this some sort of cruel joke? A misguided attempt at humor? But the look on Sarah's face told me otherwise. It was a look of certainty, of someone who believed they were sharing a truth. The chatter and laughter that had filled the room moments ago were replaced by an uneasy tension. Guests shifted in their seats, unsure of what to say or do. Meanwhile, I sat there frozen, staring at the woman I had considered my closest friend, my mind racing through every interaction, every moment that could have led to this shocking revelation. My mind was racing, frantically trying to piece together what was happening in front of me. My husband, who has always been someone who avoids attention and prefers to keep to himself, suddenly reached for my hand under the table and held it tightly. His grip was firm, almost as if he were grounding himself, or me, through this surreal moment. I glanced over at him, searching for some reassurance or understanding, but his face mirrored my own confusion. The room had fallen into an unsettling silence, and every eye was on us, creating a suffocating atmosphere of awkwardness and discomfort. I turned to Sarah, desperate for some kind of explanation, but before I continue, let me give you some context. For years, my husband and I have been trying to conceive. We have gone through countless tests, endured endless appointments, and faced the crushing reality that, due to some medical complications, getting pregnant might never be possible for us. It was a heartbreaking realization, but eventually we accepted it and learned to find joy in our life together as a couple, just the two of us. This was not a story I shared freely. Only a select few, close family members and trusted friends, knew about our struggles, Sarah being one of them. And yet, here she was, standing in front of everyone, publicly referring to my husband as the father of her unborn child. It was a blatant lie, of course, but hearing her say it still hit me like a punch to the gut. The room seemed to blur as tears welled up in my eyes, though I fought hard not to let them fall. The humiliation, the hurt, it was overwhelming. Before I could even process my emotions, Sarah suddenly burst out laughing, breaking the tension in the most jarring way imaginable. She playfully nudged her husband, Mark, and exclaimed loudly, "I was just kidding, guys! This is all just a prank for my Instagram. I set up cameras all over to capture everyone's reactions." I sat there stunned as the guests exchanged confused glances. Some let out nervous chuckles, clearly unsure how to respond, while others simply looked uncomfortable. My irritation with Sarah was boiling over. How could she possibly think this was funny? She knew about our struggles, our pain, and yet she thought it was okay to drag us into her little social media stunt. I glanced at my husband again. His face was flushed, his jaw tight, and he was still holding onto my hand as if to steady himself. I could see how deeply embarrassed and hurt he was, and it broke my heart. Mark, however, did not seem to share Sarah's amusement. He sat stiffly beside her, his expression dark and unreadable, but there was an unmistakable flicker of frustration in his eyes. Over the years, Mark and my husband had become good friends, and I could tell he felt bad for us in that moment. He caught my husband's gaze and gave him a small apologetic nod, but it did little to ease the tension in the room. I wanted to confront Sarah right then and there, to call her out for her insensitivity, but I held back. This was her baby shower, after all, and I did not want to be the one to ruin it, even though she had already ruined it for us. Instead, I plastered on a fake smile and tried to go through the motions as the party continued. We played a few games, opened gifts, and Sarah flitted around the room, chatting with guests and snapping pictures for her social media like nothing had happened. Meanwhile, my husband leaned in and whispered to me that he wanted to leave. I could not blame him. Every moment felt like a fresh reminder of what had just occurred, but I begged him to stay, not wanting to draw more attention to ourselves by leaving abruptly. I promised him that I would talk to Sarah later. As the afternoon wore on, the tension in the room became almost unbearable. It was clear that many of the guests were still unsettled by Sarah's so-called prank, and the atmosphere had shifted from celebratory to strained. Finally, Mark stood up abruptly, his face set in a stern expression. "Sarah, can we talk outside for a moment?" he asked, his tone leaving no room for argument. The room fell silent as everyone watched them step out onto the patio, their voices quickly escalating. Though they were outside, we could hear every word of their heated exchange. Mark's voice was sharp, his frustration evident as he said, "I cannot believe you would do something like this. They are our closest friends, Sarah. This was not just a harmless prank. You humiliated them in front of everyone. You even made a mockery of our baby shower." Sarah tried to defend herself, insisting that it was all in good fun, but Mark was not having it. His voice rose, cutting through her excuses as he told her to grow up and stop making insensitive jokes, especially on a day that was supposed to be about celebrating their child. The guests sat frozen, pretending not to listen while clearly hanging on every word. The mood was completely shattered, and it was painfully obvious that Mark was just as upset as we were. My husband could not take it any longer. Without a word, he stood up and walked out, telling me quietly that he would be waiting in the car. I watched him go, my heart aching for him and for the pain we had both just endured. Mark caught sight of him leaving and, for a moment, looked as though he wanted to apologize again. But he was still locked in his argument with Sarah. I stayed behind, torn between my loyalty to my friend and my need to comfort my husband. As I sat there, I could not help but wonder if Sarah truly understood the damage she had done, or if she even cared. He turned to Sarah, his face twisted with frustration, and said, "I'm done. I'm done with your immaturity. We're done. I will love this child, but I can't be with you for 1 second longer." His words sliced through the room like a knife, and the rest of us stood frozen, clutching our baby shower snacks, unsure whether to step in or pretend we hadn't heard. Sarah, clearly caught off guard, burst into tears, her hands flying to her face as if trying to hold everything together. Meanwhile, Mark didn't even flinch. Without another word, he turned on his heel and left the party, leaving behind an awkward silence that felt like it could swallow the entire room. We were all stunned. The guests exchanged glances, silently questioning if we had all just witnessed the same surreal scene. For a moment, I felt rooted to the spot, unsure of what to do. My heart ached for Sarah. She was my best friend after all, but at the same time, I knew my husband needed me. He had already been tense about attending the shower, and now he looked completely drained, his patience obviously worn thin by the drama. Deciding it was best to leave Sarah to her emotions, I quietly slipped out of the party as well, skipping the goodbyes entirely. When we got home, my husband and I sat on the couch, both still processing what had just happened. He looked more upset than I had ever seen him. "I can't believe she would pull something like that," he said, his voice heavy with disbelief. Turns out, Sarah had planned the whole thing as a prank. It was all for some ridiculous video she wanted to make for her Instagram. A viral moment, as she put it. I didn't even know how to respond. My best friend had orchestrated one of the most mortifying moments of her own baby shower just for the sake of social media clout. Later that evening, Mark sent us a text apologizing for the mess. He explained that he hadn't known Sarah was planning the prank and that he was genuinely sorry for how uncomfortable the situation had made us. That message was like a breath of fresh air. At least one person understood the weight of what had happened. My husband and I both agreed that we didn't want any lingering bad blood with Mark. His apology seemed genuine, and we appreciated his effort to reach out. But then, the next morning, I woke up to a flurry of messages from Sarah. She was completely unapologetic. Instead, she doubled down, explaining that she had pulled the prank because she was feeling overwhelmed by her pregnancy and wanted to distract herself with something fun. Fun? She claimed she couldn't understand why we were so upset and even asked why I had left the party without saying goodbye. To top it off, she then had the audacity to ask if I could drive her to her gynecologist appointment later that day. I was stunned. How could she not realize how inappropriate and hurtful her actions were? Trying to keep my frustration in check, I responded carefully. I told her that I didn't find her prank funny at all and that it had been disrespectful to everyone involved, especially to my husband and me. I explained that I needed some time to cool off and wouldn't be able to take her to her appointment that day. Her response was immediate and infuriating. She accused me of being a terrible friend for not supporting her during such a vulnerable time. The nerve of it left me speechless. When I showed the messages to my husband, he was just as angry as I was. "You don't owe her anything," he said firmly, "not after what she did. If she can't see how hurtful her actions were, then she doesn't deserve your energy." Taking his advice to heart, I sent Sarah a final message. I told her I wouldn't be speaking to her until she apologized. Not just to me, but to my husband as well. I also made it clear that if she so much as thought about uploading the prank video, I would take legal action. Instead of apologizing, Sarah went on a tirade. She claimed she had done nothing wrong and accused me of being jealous of her because she was pregnant. That accusation hit me like a punch to the gut. Jealous? Of her? After everything I had done to plan her baby shower and support her during her pregnancy, I couldn't believe the words on my screen. She eventually texted again, saying she wouldn't post the video, but that I should put my feelings aside and support her through this challenging time. She also mentioned that Mark hadn't come home the night before, implying that she was now completely alone. Reading her messages, I felt my resolve waver slightly, but then her earlier accusations echoed in my mind. This wasn't someone who wanted genuine support. This was someone who couldn't see past her own ego. Tears streamed down my face as I realized what I had to do. As much as it hurt, I couldn't keep pouring energy into a friendship that had become so toxic. Without replying to her last message, I blocked her number. The sadness hit me hard, but so did the relief. So am I the asshole for not being there for my pregnant best friend after the prank she pulled? Honestly, I don't think so. Sometimes you have to protect your peace, even if it means walking away from someone you thought would be in your life forever. Update 1. And honestly, it feels like I have lived an entire month's worth of drama in just these past few days. First off, I want to start by clarifying something for everyone. Sarah is not the kind of person who plays pranks or jokes around, especially not when it comes to serious matters. So for her to pull a prank on me was genuinely shocking. I have known her since we were teenagers, and she has always been the more serious and grounded one in our circle. Seeing this side of her is completely out of character. Now, on to the bigger news. Mark is dead serious about leaving Sarah. My husband had a long conversation with him over the weekend, and it turns out Mark is actively seeking a divorce lawyer. This is not just a spur-of-the-moment decision. He is determined to move forward. Since then, Sarah has been bombarding him with phone calls and texts, practically begging him to come back. She keeps insisting that he should get over his feelings, as if his emotions are just a temporary inconvenience for her. But here's the thing, Mark has not responded to her at all. He has completely cut her off, and I think that silence is driving her mad. Things escalated even further when Sarah accused Mark of having an affair with me. That accusation came out of nowhere and completely blindsided both of us. For the record, Mark and I are just friends, and while he is heartbroken about the breakdown of his marriage, it is because Sarah has changed so much that he barely recognizes her anymore. She is not the person he fell in love with, and it is painfully obvious to everyone around them. Since I blocked Sarah on my phone, she has found a new target: my husband. Yesterday after work, he showed me a long, nasty message she sent him. In it, she accused him of trying to ruin our friendship and even went as far as to insult him for not being able to make me pregnant. I was absolutely livid. Up until now, I have been trying to be understanding. I told myself that maybe her pregnancy hormones were making her act out, or that the stress of everything was clouding her judgment. But this crossed a line I cannot ignore. I decided that enough was enough. As you know, I was in charge of organizing Sarah's baby shower, which included setting up her baby registry. I spent hours working with her to create a list of essential items that she would need for the baby, but Sarah insisted on adding ridiculously expensive items, things that most of the guests could not afford. At the shower, I noticed some guests stuck to the list, but others brought thoughtful gifts that were not on it but were still incredibly useful for a new mom. Sarah did not seem appreciative at all. In fact, she looked annoyed that people dared to stray from her carefully curated list. Originally, I had planned to gift her a few of the pricier items myself, but after that disgusting message to my husband, I canceled my order immediately. Not only that, but I also deleted the baby registry entirely. If she wants one now, she can start over from scratch. But that is not all. A few days before the baby shower, I received a message from the caterer asking for final confirmation. As a surprise, I had already paid half of the deposit for the catering service and intended to pay the remainder after the event. However, with all the chaos surrounding Sarah, it completely slipped my mind. When I finally spoke to the caterer to explain the situation, I was relieved to learn that Sarah had booked the service under her name. This meant that the final bill would go to her, not me. The caterer was understanding and assured me that I would not be responsible for any additional charges. When I told my husband about this, he could not stop laughing. He said it was poetic justice, and honestly, I agree. At this point, I have no intention of reaching out to Sarah. I have given her more chances than she deserves, and her recent behavior has made it clear that she does not value our friendship. Looking back, there were so many red flags, small comments she made that I brushed off at the time. I see now that she was not as kind or supportive as I thought she was. I am done wasting my time and energy on someone who cannot even treat the people around her with basic decency. From now on, I am focusing on the people who truly matter and bring positivity into my life. Thank you to everyone who has supported me through this mess. It has been an eye-opening experience, to say the least. Update 2. I can hardly believe the audacity. A few days after I had a conversation with the caterer about the situation, I received an email from Sarah. The moment her name popped up in my inbox, I knew she was back with more of her nonsense. Honestly, I wish I had been wrong, but of course I wasn't. The email was a complete tirade, and it left me stunned at just how low she could stoop. In the email, she accused me of being cheap because I refused to pay for the entire catering service, despite, as she put it, obviously being able to afford it. According to her, I was acting stuck up, a trait she claimed I had because I was born into family money. Then, as if that wasn't vile enough, she went for the jugular. She said she was glad I could never be pregnant. Let me say that again. She celebrated the fact that I couldn't have kids. I don't know what kind of person you have to be to write that to someone, but apparently Sarah has no problem crossing every line. She didn't stop there, though. She went on a full-blown character assassination. She told me that she had only kept me around all these years to make her own life easier. She called me ugly, multiple times, and outright said I didn't deserve my husband. Then came the real dagger. She claimed my husband had only married me for my money because, according to her, I'm too ugly to deserve love. If that wasn't enough, she accused me of ruining her marriage, saying that I was the reason she and her husband, Mark, were having problems. The email was laced with explosive profanities, insults, and just about every cruel thing you could imagine someone saying. By the time I finished reading it, I was shaking with a mix of disbelief and anger. I showed the email to my husband. To say he was furious would be the understatement of the year. Over the years, we've done so much for this woman, and this is how she repays us? We were there for her during her endless breakups, offering comfort and support. We took her on vacations with us, not once, not twice, but multiple times, paying for her flights and hotel rooms. My husband even went out of his way to help her parents, repairing their house and lending them money when they needed it. We treated her like family, and now she's stabbing us in the back in the most vicious way imaginable. My husband didn't waste any time. He called Mark and invited him over for dinner so we could discuss the situation. When Mark arrived, we showed him the email, and the look on his face was a mix of shock and disgust. It turns out he had been dealing with her tirades too. Mark pulled out his phone and showed us a string of text messages she had sent him. They were just as vile as the email she sent me, full of insults and accusations. She had even accused him of cheating on her, an accusation he vehemently denied. What disturbed us most was how serious these accusations were. You don't just throw around words like that in anger, they can ruin lives. Mark explained that his lawyer had advised him to keep screenshots of every message and not respond to her, no matter how outrageous her behavior became. He also took a photo of the email she sent me to share with his divorce lawyer. Yes, divorce lawyer. Mark had already contacted one and was taking steps to end their marriage. Since my original post, a few people have reached out to me, suggesting that Sarah might have some kind of neurological or mental health issue causing this behavior. While I appreciate the concern, let me just clarify. Sarah has always had a temper. Even back in college, she was quick to anger and had no problem unloading on people with profanities, even in public. I never thought she would direct that rage at me, but here we are. Despite everything, my husband and I are still planning to reach out to her parents. We're going to show them all the messages and emails and let them decide if they think she needs medical help. Beyond that, I'm done. I have no intention of unblocking her or responding to her ever again. I've done more for her than most people would, and I refuse to keep subjecting myself to her disrespect and cruelty. At this point, my focus is on moving forward. My husband and I are currently in the Maldives, taking a much-needed break from everything. We've been lounging on the beach, sipping cocktails, and finally allowing ourselves to relax. After everything that's happened, I'm determined to put this chapter behind me and enjoy the life we've built together, with our dogs, our careers, and most importantly, each other. All right, here is the much-anticipated update that many of you have been asking about. As most of us expected, Mark and Sarah have officially finalized their divorce. The court proceedings were exactly as messy as everyone had predicted. Mark's legal team pulled no punches, presenting mountains of evidence to back up his case. They also leaned heavily on their previously agreed-upon prenuptial agreement, which left very little wiggle room for Sarah and her lawyer to challenge. No matter how hard Sarah and her lawyer tried to push back, they ultimately could not gain any traction in the courtroom. The judge did make it clear, however, that both Mark and Sarah need to come together and create a cohesive co-parenting plan. The focus has to remain on their daughter's well-being, and neither party is allowed to put their personal grievances above that. While this sounds reasonable on paper, knowing Sarah, I am not holding my breath for a smooth transition into cooperative co-parenting. Speaking of Sarah, after her erratic behavior during and after the divorce case reached its climax, we decided to reach out to her parents. To be honest, I was curious about her situation, but also wanted to understand what led to her recent downward spiral. Her parents filled us in on the details. Apparently, Sarah has had no choice but to move back in with them. Her pregnancy, coupled with her lack of any substantial work experience, meant she could not afford to live independently for long. Her brief foray into trying to make a living as a social media influencer did not pan out as she had hoped. Without a steady income, she ended up back at her childhood home. From what I have gathered through mutual friends, Sarah's social circle imploded almost immediately after her disastrous baby shower incident. People just did not want to get caught up in her ongoing drama. One by one, even her closest friends distanced themselves from her, leaving her completely isolated. It was a harsh reality check for her, but honestly, I think she brought most of it on herself. Mark, on the other hand, seems to be thriving, or at least as much as one can in this kind of situation. He stayed away from Sarah throughout the latter part of her pregnancy, likely for his own sanity. The only exception was when she went into labor. Mark was there the entire night in the delivery room, and he got to witness the birth of their daughter. Since then, he has thrown himself into fatherhood with an enthusiasm I did not expect. He spends as much time with his daughter as he can, and he is fully committed to providing financial support as per the court agreement. Mark has also been leaning on my husband for support. The two of them meet up every weekend without fail. Sometimes they play golf, other times they just sit down for a few drinks and talk. It is good to see him finding some sense of normalcy after everything he has been through. Oh, and in case anyone was curious about the whole baby shower catering fiasco, Sarah did eventually pay the bill. It was not out of the goodness of her heart, though. The caterer had to threaten her with legal action before she coughed up the money. It is just another example of how she continues to avoid taking responsibility until her back is against the wall. Sarah has also been sending me emails, which I honestly should have expected. In these emails, she goes on and on about how I am somehow to blame for her life falling apart. According to her, I am the root cause of all her problems. It is exhausting, but I have chosen not to engage. Her parents have been taking her for all kinds of medical tests, convinced that there must be some underlying issue causing her erratic behavior. But every test has come back normal. There is nothing physically wrong with her. At the end of the day, her actions are just the result of her own choices, and it is high time she starts owning up to them. For the sake of her daughter, I truly hope Sarah can turn things around. This little girl did not ask to be brought into a life filled with chaos and drama. She deserves a stable, loving environment, and that starts with Sarah taking a long, hard look at herself and making some serious changes. As for me and my husband, we have not let any of this drama affect our marriage. We moved past it quickly and redirected our energy toward our personal and professional lives. Sundays are still reserved for our date nights, just like when we first started dating. I cannot describe how grateful I feel to still have that spark in my marriage. Every time I look at him, I am reminded of why I fell in love with him in the first place. To those of you who have shared your struggles with starting a family, I want to take a moment to say this. Your journey is valid no matter what path you take. Life has a way of throwing unexpected challenges at us, but there are always alternative ways to build a family. For my husband and me, we have found fulfillment in each other's company, and we are content focusing on building a life filled with happiness and shared experiences.